the first lecture now. So I would like to introduce Ms. Haruno Nakashiba, who is currently working as a Senior Protection Officer of UNHCR Bangladesh. In 2004, she joined UNHCR, and her very first duty station was actually in Cox's Bazar. Thereafter, she served in various refugee operations in various countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Jordan. And then before returning to Bangladesh in November 2017 for the Rohingya refugee crisis, actually. Academically, she holds a PhD in sociology of education from the University of Tokyo, and she also did her LLM in international human rights from the Queen Mary University of London. So without any further ado, I would request the speaker to deliver her lecture.
Okay, thank you so much, Naureen. I'm sorry but so thank you so much for the introduction, and with this let me start. And thank you really so much for the Center for the Study of Genocide and Justice for inviting UNHCR for this very important the online certificate course for us an opportunity to. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk about the UNHCR work and our assistance to the forcibly displaced population. And I will make in my presentation kind of reflection of what we have done for the Bangladeshi refugees in 1971, and also what we are doing currently in 2020 for the forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals in Cox's Bazar. So as Naureen introduced, Bangladesh is a special place for me because this is where I started my career with refugees. And I worked in 2004 to 2005 in Cox's Bazar. Back then, the Cox's Bazar was very different from what it looks now. And on top of that, thereafter I married to a Bangladeshi who was born and brought up in Bangladesh. So I'm very pleased to be a Banglabo on top of being a UNHCR staff, and I'm very honored to have had the chance to work in Bangladesh again. And my family is also very happy to be back. So thank you so much. Let me start. I will share my screen. And so today's presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of UNHCR's contributions to assist the displaced population over the course of the Bangladesh's important history, and since the time of the independence in 1971, and also how the current challenge that Bangladeshis have with the Rohingya crisis, and then how we as UN agencies is trying to assist the government in responding and finding a durable solution for this refugee crisis. UNHCR was established in 1950 through the General Assembly resolution, and which adopted the statute of the Office of the UNHCR. UNHCR stands for United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and this statute calling on governments to cooperate with UNHCR and to become parties to the 1951 Refugee Convention and admit refugees onto their territories and provide necessary humanitarian assistance, and also provide UNHCR with information about the number and conditions for refugees on their territory. Many countries in the world may not be a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, but the Article 35 of the UNHCR statute, which is adopted by the General Assembly, asks the states to cooperate with UNHCR to facilitate its duty of supervising the application of the provision of the convention. So we were born in 1950, and it is, of course, unfortunate that we are still active operating, which means the issue of refugees and forced displacement issue has not ceased to exist in the world, and even more, it is increasingly important and critical issue at our time. The definition of a refugee is legally defined in the 1951 Refugee Convention. And let me, it's on the screen, but let me read. So the refugee is a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, and is outside of the country of his or her nationality and is unable to, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself or herself of the protection of that country. After almost 70 years, this definition still stands. And in many refugee situations in the world, we are always able to find the ground for persecution falling into one of these five grounds as defined in the 1951 Refugee Convention. So there are about 80 million people in the world currently who are forcefully displaced. Some are still within his or her own country of origin, and some have crossed the border and became a refugee. And this, the well-founded fear of being persecuted concept, has objective and subjective elements. So it's a very well-defined the definition for refugee. And UNHCR assessed 20 million refugees who meet this criterion worldwide. And this 1951 Refugee Convention also talks about those populations who are stateless. So what it says is that the refugee is a who not having a nationality and being outside the country of his or her former habitual residence as a result of such events is unable to, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to return to it. So I think it's very important to recognize that the stateless people can also be a refugee at the same time. And when we talk about stateless people, the place of the country of origin is also be interpreted as the former habitual residence. This is very much legally speaking. So the UNHCR's mandate is to provide the international protection and to find a durable solution. So what do we mean by durable solutions? There are three widely recognized durable solutions. One, and this is often the most favored solution for the refugees and all others involved, which is voluntary repatriation. There are very important principle as to it. So the return must be a voluntary choice of the refugee, and it should take place in conditions of safety. And this concept of safety includes physical safety, legal safety, material safety. And it should take place with dignity. The second durable solution is local integration. And this actually in the examples in the past tells that this is a very complex and gradual process which has legal, economic, social, and cultural dimensions. And at the end, what it tries to achieve is the refugee acquiring the nationality of the country of asylum. And the third durable solution is a resettlement. This is a demonstration of the important response sharing mechanism of the international community. So what the resettlement offers is to transfer refugees from the first asylum country to another state, which has agreed to admit them as refugees and ultimately grant a permanent settlement. So that some refugees move from one country to another for important protection reasons or with specific particular needs, and the country agrees to grant the person as a refugee status, but which has a clear provision of becoming a permanent resident and eventually a citizen of the country. So this is about UNHCR's mandate and our important work in search for the durable solution. Let's look at the history of Bangladesh, and I think the participants are very well aware of these important years that Bangladesh has gone through. So from the refugee perspective, I've just highlighted that So yeah, the events leading up to the displacement. Let me start from the March 1971. So the March 1971, there was a violent protest in East Pakistan, prompted the crackdown by the Pakistani armed forces and the imposition of military rule. And in the midst of it, the independence of the People's Republic of Bangladesh was declared. So, but that triggered the atrocities, which is actually the theme of this online certificate course. So the people had to flee their own homes, their own community, in order to save their lives, in order to save their dignity. So in total, the 10 million people from then East Pakistan has fled to seek safety in the nearby states, which in this case was India, clearly. The scale of displacement was so massive that in a month, 1 million of the Bangladeshi has fled. And by the end of May that year, the 4 million has fled to the nearby country, and with a daily influx of 100,000. And between April and December, in total, almost 10 million people left the East Pakistan and to seek safety. Where did people go? So these are the locations where the refugee camps were set up in 1971. As you see, all the borders that the Bangladesh has with India, there are refugee camps set up in all these border areas. And the number of humanitarian operations was massive. In order to accommodate almost 10 million refugees, there were 825 refugee camps set up in West Bengal, in Tripura, in Meghalaya, and Assam, and other places. And in some areas, the number of refugees actually outnumbered the host population, the people of India. And what is also to note was this has created a huge political concern for the Indian government of India, because the areas were already had some issues with the indigenous populations. So the large number of the Bangladeshi sought safety and asylum in these border areas was seen as a very sensitive matter. And of course, it required immediate humanitarian interventions to take place. So how the Indian government, together with the UNHCR, responded to the crisis? So the Indian government offered the temporary status for these Bangladeshi refugees, and they called them as evacuees. And it was very clear that, their stay is temporary, and a 6 months time frame was imposed for the return of the Bangladeshi refugees. And this was a huge refugee influx that we have not seen. And the Deputy High Commissioner of the UNHCR at that time visited this refugee campus and stated that words fail me to describe the human plight that we have just seen. The people have left with injuries, with scars and traumas. On top of that, the health facilities, shelters, and other services for refugees were inadequate. So, yeah. And also on top of that, the monsoon season created operational problems, the administration of the relief work. And there was an outbreak of communicable diseases such as cholera in the camp. Because of that, many refugees actually died. So UNHCR was requested by the government of India to assist, to assist the refugees. And actually this was for the first time UNHCR was chosen to act as a general coordinator for all UN assistance. And that Secretary General at that time requested UNHCR to be a focal point. The concept of focal point was relatively new at that time. But the massive scale of the displacement required the coordination of the multiple UN agencies to come together and assist the refugees who are very vulnerable and who desperately needed the humanitarian intervention. So the UNHCR took up the role of the focal point for this close to 10 million refugees. And just as a background, back in 1970, UNHCR was mandated for just about 2.5 million refugees worldwide. So the additional responsibility that UNHCR has taken in order to respond to this crisis was really an unprecedented scale. So as a focal point, the UNHCR was tasked to mobilize of international support and funds and ensure the procurement is done to deliver the necessary relief supplies and coordinate closely with the government of India and establish and chair the UN Standing Interagency Consultative Unit and also committed to facilitate repatriation efforts. So then as you all will know, in December, the things started to move. And the Bangladesh, India sought also a political solution that enabled the return of the Bangladeshi refugees. And also there was an intervention of the military force. So UNHCR's role at that time was to play an intermediary role in ensuring a ceasefire between the two armies. So then once the victory is achieved, so what do refugees do? Of course, refugees all do want to go home. They really want to go home. So there was a very large scale refugee influx, but also there was a large scale, remarkably large scale voluntary return process kicked off. So sometimes on a daily average, there's 210,000 Bangladeshi refugees returned to the newly established Bangladesh. So in that assistance, what UNHCR has done is UNHCR helped to set up transit camps in Bangladesh so that the returnees can receive medical services and food rations and transport assistance so that they can reach to their homes, so the original homes and the communities. And by 1972, 9 million refugees had returned to home and returned to newly independent Bangladesh. Also, UNHCR assisted a large air repatriation, which means, so there were populations from both sides in Bangladesh and also in the Pakistan side who opted to return to the other side of the continent. So UNHCR helped to repatriate 231,000 people from both sides through the airlift. And this was the largest emergency airlift of civilians organized by UNHCR. Now let's look at the situation of today, of 2020. So I forgot to mention, yes, of course, between this 1970s, the Rohingya refugee crisis, this is 2020, is not a new crisis for Bangladesh. There were a couple of times in the past that Rohingya refugees crossed borders and sought safety in Bangladesh. The one large movement was 1978, and then there were another movement in 1991 to 1992, and then in a much smaller scale, 2012 and 2016. But the Rohingya refugee influx in 2017 was no doubt the largest what we have observed. And this is the largest refugee crisis in this region. And Bangladesh now hosts the world's largest refugee camp. The current refugee population in Bangladesh, the Rohingya population, is 860,000 individuals. This number was the number of individuals verified by the UNHCR and the government of Bangladesh jointly. And there are 860,000 people. It's a families, 187 families. There are children. About 50 to 51% of the population is a children, and they are vulnerable women. They are elderlies. So they are all accommodated in the district of Cox's Bazar. So you, as a Bangladeshi, and also as I think we have a tremendous respect to the people of Bangladesh and the government of Bangladesh for having this very humanitarian decision to host the Rohingya, accept the Rohingya refugees to come. It literally saved lives. It's a huge responsibility undertaking. As you can see, that how the landscape of Cox's Bazar has changed by the presence of 860,000 people. Bangladesh is already a densely populated country, and we know that the land is so scarce and so precious. The refugees camp was set up in the previously a forest area. So the photo in the above shows how it looked like before, and then below looks how the beginning of the crisis established refugee settlements. And the right side is that's how it's more how the entire settlements was set up. I think now it looks much more greener than what the photo shows, because we also worked together with the other actors to plant trees and also to distribute it LPG, the gas, so that refugees and also the host community do not need to cut trees anymore, not to get a fuel for their cooking and daily needs. So I will also come to this important assistance that we are doing in order to protect the environment. So what does the refugee response mean? So this humanitarian response is of course coordinated and implemented under the leadership of the government of Bangladesh. So these are the areas that we are working together with the government of Bangladesh and other humanitarian actors to provide assistance to the refugees. If someone leaves the country for persecution and seek asylum asylum and safety in a new place, it's really the entire life of the person needs to be assisted. So it requires a shelter, food, water, sanitation, healthcare, education, and the safety, importantly. So the UNHCR also coordinates coordinates the humanitarian response of the Rohingya crisis. And 2020, unexpectedly, this COVID-19, the pandemic, also has had an important impact in our operation planning and implementation. So we are assisting I got from the diagram on the top. So 860,000 Rohingya refugees, but of course, we also want to support the 400 host community. Our joint response plan already included about 444,000 host communities support needs. And with the COVID pandemic, we increased the assistance to the host communities. So now, in addition, 509,000 host community people are under this response plan. How much does it take to respond? So the joint response plan, before COVID, we asked the international communities and donors for $877 million US support. And what I would like to highlight is the 117 partners are working, and more than half is a national NGOs, together with UN agencies and international NGOs. Now the new requirement with the COVID pandemic, we asked the donor community to to please support additional 181 million. Again, the national NGOs are taking a very pivotal, vital role in this. So I think compared to the 1971 refugee response, we have much more wider multi-partner operation happening, and a very important role that national NGOs, national actors are taking. And also we also emphasize a lot in everything that we do, that the importance of assisting the host communities. Because without their support, we cannot sustain a refugee operation. Our strategic objectives, as stipulated in the Joint Response Plan, talks about 4 strategic objectives, which talks about strengthen the protection of Rohingya refugees, women, men, girls, and boys, and deliver quality life-saving assistance to population in need. The basic life-saving assistance must continue. And also foster the well-being of communities in Ukiah and Teknafu Baziras who live side by side with refugees and hosting them. And importantly, we must work towards achieving sustainable solutions in Myanmar. The Rohingya refugees, in the UN agencies, in view of the international conventions and the international laws, that we call Rohingyas as refugees. And as you know, the government of Bangladesh referred them as a forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. So the formal legal status is still not yet determined. As we have seen in the photo, and I'm sure you already know, that camps are severely congested. And the population density is very high. And it's about 8 square meters per person, while the humanitarian, the minimum standard is 45 square meters per person. So this congestion really creates risks to the additional hazards, including the vulnerabilities to the seasonal cyclone and monsoon impact. And the current policy framework restricts the socioeconomic rights to be accessed by the refugees, meaning that livelihood activities or formally engage in income generating activity is not allowed. So what does this mean? It means these 860,000 refugees continue to rely on the humanitarian aid. And also this is a big community. There are critical needs to meet the specific needs of women, particularly vulnerable people, women, children, elderly, disabled. We must really continue to address the different needs that the individuals have. And Cox's Bazar faced triple shocks. That Cox's Bazar was already, in terms of the development indicators, it is not the best even in Bangladesh. So now with this large presence of the refugee population and also the COVID-19, it's the natural resources of regional public services systems are strained. So we are really encouraging the development partners to prioritize Cox's Bazar for their assistance. And this also hopefully solve the tensions between the host community and refugees. The Cox's Bazar is also sorry, I'm mindful of the time. The Cox's Bazar is also the border areas, so the drug crime and human trafficking is also an issue which affects all the people who live there. But refugees say, Rohingya refugees say they would like to go home. They're very grateful for Bangladesh for sheltering them. And they would like to speak, they would like request the government of Myanmar to speak to them and try to find a way to go home. So what can we do to assist the Rohingya refugees find a durable solution? I think we must be firm that no one should be a refugee forever. The displacement often takes a very long time to solve, but I think we have to determine that no one should be a refugee forever. And voluntary repatriation to Myanmar is what the refugees want, the sense of belonging. Their sense of belonging is in Myanmar. But conditions must be created in Myanmar for them to return safely and so that they can reintegrate and live peacefully and sustainably. So this has to be the last time that the Rohingya refugees had to leave their place of origin and seek safety elsewhere. So we are very much supporting the government of Bangladesh's efforts to achieve that. I think this is almost the last slide. That so the Global Compact on Refugees was adopted in December 2018. And the objective of this Global Compact on Refugees really talks, we can really see that its relevance to the context in Bangladesh is first, yes, let's try to collectively ease pressure on host countries and try to enhance the refugee self-reliance so that they'll be less dependent on aid. Of course, we need to plan and assess very carefully, considering the local context. And then expand access to third country solutions. This is what GCR aims for, and support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. And this should be done in a multi-stakeholder and partnership approach. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunities. And this is the end of my presentation. And there are some website information here for those who are interested to find out more about what we do and how the Rohingya refugees are assisted. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Haruno. So we quickly move on to the question answer session. So I request the participants, if you have any question or comments to the speaker, it's your time now. So would start first.
Hello. Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for your lecture. Just a quick question from you. Would UNHCR realize that the incidents both in 1971 and 2017 are maybe interpreted as a term of genocide? Hello?
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much.
Is it clear, my question?
So your question is whether UNHCR determines these two refugee influx as genocide. Yes.
Yeah.
So there are different UN entities who deals with different areas of the human rights. What UNHCR is mandated is to provide the humanitarian response to those who became a refugee or who were displaced. And of course, the reason has a very important relevance to why they had to become a refugee. But UNHCR does not have the institutional capacity to determine whether the act happened was genocide or not. But this is done by the other UN mechanisms.
So any other question from the participants? Okay, I think let me ask you one question. So one basic question, but it's very vital. We have been reading so many news and I have been seeing so many documentaries on the COVID situation in the refugee camps and the distressed people who are dealing with this within the makeshift camps. So can you give your impression towards the whole pandemic situation and how you are coping up with this situation with the Rohingya refugees? steps?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. And this is really currently going on, the assistance. So starting the end of March and then more also since April, the government of Bangladesh has made a very decisive and very quick action to limit the activities in the camp, refugee camp, to critical activities. And this is for the public health measures in order to curb the spread of the COVID-19 virus to the refugee settlements. So this has resulted in the delay in the spread of the COVID-19, and we humanitarians were able to use this time to establish the treatment facilities, isolation facilities, and different medical. We assisted the Sadar Hospital in Cox's Bazar and established different clinics in order to cope with the crisis that were coming, the public health issues that were coming. So now today, fortunately, the number of Rohingya refugees confirmed positive for COVID is still relatively small. And the treatment facilities are used by both the host community patients and also the refugees. And actually the host community, the members of the host community are using more of the facilities that we have built. So we are doing our best to respond to the new crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if we have any other questions to the speaker, or otherwise we would wrap up the session.
So, Naureen, can I ask a question to Ms.
Yeah,
Haruno?
sure.
To Ms. Haruno, thank you for your nice presentation on the UNHCR part of the refugee assistance in Bangladesh, especially. I would like to ask you one question regarding that. How the UNHCR actually decides upon the nature of the refugee who are eligible to get the assistance? I mean, is it a organization's own discretion, or they rely on any other mechanism which decides the eligibility of the refugee support and assistance, be that any part of the world? So how do you think of that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And I will just reply short in this reply, but because it has a very elaborated and well-developed system to determine, to make an assessment of who the refugees are, which is driven from the definition of the 1951 Refugee Convention. And so we can talk a lot more about that in a different occasion, but I just want to highlight that the refugee status is accorded to the civilians. For those who have committed atrocious crimes or war crimes, the crime against humanities, that we have a system to disqualify such individuals from enjoying the refugee status.
So it's decided by the UNHCR organizational discretion, not like reliable to any other sources that decides that they are eligible to get the assistance from UNHCR. It's the organization's own decisions to decide upon the refugee status of the civilians.
So the humanitarian assistance is given to everybody who are in need. And the refugee status the determination has a legal connotation that requires a certain procedures. And some countries choose to do it by themselves with the support of UNHCR. In some other contexts that all civilians fled the situation which generated the refugee situation are considered as refugees. So it really depends on the context, but UNHCR has a supervisory role to supervise like who are recognized as refugees. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Haruno. So we are almost at the end of this first session of this certificate course, week 2. So thank you so much to the speaker for joining us to the online certificate course, and we hope to have you in our other activities as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you really so much for this opportunity. It was a very nice joining the session, and all the best to all the participants. Thank you so much, Mr. Mohidu. Thank you.
Thank you, Haruno.
Yeah.